What does it take to stay ahead in B2B SaaS? Winning in the margins. Welcome to the new go-to-market playbook. I'm your host, James Kaikis, Chief Revenue and Experience Officer at Testbox. In our interview series, I sit down with go-to-market operators, leaders, and industry experts who are defining the next era of go-to-market by winning in the margins. These leaders are focused on incremental innovations and non-obvious advantages that drive big results. The goal of this interview series is for you to take action in your business, so sit back, grab a notepad, and enjoy the episode. Godard, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to see you.
Yeah, fun to be here with you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your time because something about you is you know Sam, Senior, our CEO, very well, and actually were introduced to Testbox in the infancy of the business. Is that correct?
Yes, and I moved to Boulder during the pandemic. And Sam, now my entrepreneur friend, also lives in Boulder. So we got to know each other. We're both in YPO now as well, but we're kind of through the Boulder entrepreneurship ecosystem.
That's got to be a tight-knit system.
It is, because I was in the Bay Area in Palo Alto before. And yeah, compared to the Bay Area, well, probably everything's tiny.
Yeah.
But it does make it also a closer community.
Yeah, I love that. Sam speaks very highly of you, and obviously, I think many people know about your background. But what was it about Testbox and Sam that made you, want to be an angel investor in this business?
Well, I think the vision is very complementary, because I think we both saw that software buying and selling is way too hard. And especially, I think, also software buyers, I think the part we're trying to solve, it's hard to just even discover apps.
Sure.
It's hard to know which app to even look at. G2 is trying to solve that with G2.com and our reviews and sort of a master directory to make it easier to discover the right apps and see which ones you can trust based on peer reviews. But then typically the next step in software buying is you want to get your hands on the product.
Absolutely.
Some people have like a demo button, a free trial button, but I think the challenge that Sam saw, that I also saw when I was building my last two companies, CP companies, like an empty demo or a generic demo video usually doesn't do it. And most customers want to load some of their data.
Sure.
And I remember Sam was starting with help desk software.
Yeah.
But they want to see, hey, what would it look like for my help desk, for my workflow with my case data, and how would this app actually work?
Totally.
And so I love that vision, allow the buyer to get hands-on.
Yeah.
And they could do multiple apps. I think they could look at Zendesk, they could look at Freshdesk,
Yep.
They could look at Service Cloud, but they could actually get a real working demo environment or a test box. And so I thought that was a very complementary vision to what we're doing at G2. And I thought it would also help the software buyer and seller collaborate more efficiently.
That's actually how I got introduced to Testbox as well. When I heard the marketplace, I was like, wow, this is a fascinating idea. Obviously, we've shifted as a business, but still that core premise is true to what we do as a business. And one of the things that you mentioned that I'd love to dig into is your own background, experience building companies and dealing with demo problems. So can you just give a little bit of a background on yourself and what you've done in your career?
Yeah, well, I've been enterprise software entrepreneur now for 25 years. And hard to believe. And this week is Dreamforce. It's also my 20th Dreamforce.
Oh, man, that's a lot of Dreamforces.
Yes. And so we started our first company, Big Machines, way back in 2000. And this was really the original .com boom here in the Bay Area. And for about a year, it was incredible. .com boom, we raised like $20 million. And I was also very young. I think I was like fresh out of business school, maybe like 27, 28 years old. And we were able, just on vision, PowerPoint, smart team, able to raise $20 million. And we thought, we're going to create the company for the next millennium. For a few months, we kind of operated that way. We scaled up to like 70 employees from zero, and, we were just going. But then it got much harder quickly because what happened was the .com bubble burst. And I remember in 2001, people were even saying Amazon was going to go bankrupt.
Wow. Really?
Yes. And because they'd gone public late 90s, but they also took on like $500 million in debt. And figured they were losing a lot of money. And then I think there was a big lashback against the internet.
That's right.
Where people were like, wow, this was just a fad, And if you read Bezos' biography, he's still kind of bitter about it. But these credit analysts on Wall Street were just betting, when's Amazon going to be bankrupt?
Wow.
And we started Big Machines to help manufacturers sell complex products online. And the founding vision was to help manufacturers. My father was in pup manufacturing.
Okay. Very cool.
And he was back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
That's where I'm from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I remember the idea actually came to me like November 99. I went back to Pittsburgh for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I was here in the Valley, and at the time it was the reality distortion zone, people called it. It might still be that.
It might still be that. It's gotten closer to reality, I think.
But everyone was already punch drunk on the internet, right? And the internet's going to change everything. And then it was like very sober. I went home to see my dad, and I'm like, he was selling complex industrial pumps.
Yeah.
I was like, Dad, how's the internet going to affect your business? And he was just like, it's not. And I was like, what do you mean, Dad? And he's like, hey, look, my products aren't like books, which is all Bezos and Amazon were selling at the time.
Yep.
He's like, they're very complex pumps, and we have to configure a different pump based on pressure, flow rate, viscosity, chemistry for each customer. And he's like, I need a pump engineer to help our customers do that, right? There's no way to do it online. But at that time, I saw what Michael Dell was doing. And he was also obviously a great entrepreneur, started in the 90s, started Dell. He's still a huge company today, but he was one of the first to sell PCs direct to consumers online. And they were also, especially at that time, they were quite configurable. You could obviously choose like a different screen size. You could choose your RAM, your CPU, your operating system. And so they built this online configurator that would help you put together the perfect PC, but also in real time, you could see pricing, lead time, and just place the order online. And that was very revolutionary at that time.
Yeah, it was.
Like Dell was the first company to do it. And then I said, wow, I could help my dad sell his pumps like Dell sells PCs.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was the idea. And then luckily my dad was skeptical, but ultimately supportive of his son.
Yeah.
So became my first customer, my first angel investor.
Amazing.
My dad only had like 100 employees. He only had 2 IT people. And he also knew nothing about even hosting a website and certainly not running online software. So we also decided to build it today called in the cloud, where we'd handle all the hosting for the customer, just send them a login and they could upload their own products, their own rules, and be up and selling. That was a basic idea.
Wow, that's incredible. That's not the only company that you founded. You've obviously founded a couple more companies. So what happened after Big Machines?
Well, and first, like Big Machines, honestly, that company 3 years in almost failed, just to kind of complete that story because of dot-com bust. And then I remember like 2001, 2002, I'd raised venture capital. And I think my business plan, like 2001, I'm going to sign up 20 customers. I ended up signing up 2.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I was 90% off sales plan. Same thing happened in 2002. And then by 2003, we were almost bankrupt because we burned through 19 to 20 million. And so we weren't going to be able to raise any more money. Like our numbers were terrible.
Yeah.
And I remember then we had to pivot to organic positive cash flow. And we only had like 12 customers because manufacturers are also, like we'd call on them. They're like, yeah, this is kind of interesting, but the internet's a fad. We're happy sending out paper catalogs, so it was very tough, but we did persevere. And I think my co-founder, Chris, and I think we didn't want to quit each other. And we did have a dozen early customers that was actually working. They were able to like do quotes and orders online like 80, 90% faster. And so we're like, hey, eventually the market will come around if we can survive, kind of through a deep chasm. Because that led to the second company we did. Eventually, we actually partnered with Salesforce. And I came to their first Dreamforce in 2003.
Amazing. Wow.
And met Mark Benioff, and he was just starting to have partners. I'm like, hey, Mark, I think we'd partner, our CPQ app. And it turned out to be true as Salesforce moved up market. They started selling, big manufacturers like GE, and they needed a partner like Big Machine. So that's what made the company successful eventually, after many years of struggle. But we wound up selling it to Oracle. Kind of 12 years in the journal, became Oracle CPQ. And then I had a break for about a year. And I remember it was kind of nice. Like I was home with my wife and kids. We had young kids. But I was also like, I was kind of depressed, like after a few months. Yeah. And my wife was like, hey, what's wrong with you? Because like I wasn't getting out of bed in the morning. And then I kind of realized, one, I was kind of burned out. Like it was so much stress and like from the near failure. But then after a few months, I kind of realized, wow, I missed it. Yeah, I missed building. Especially I missed my team.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided, let's build some more, And then after Big Machines was acquired by Oracle, we thought there'd be a vacuum in the Salesforce ecosystem. And because Salesforce was our biggest partner, that's when we decided to build SteelBrick, which was like a Big Machines 2.0, a next-gen CPQ, but specifically built just for Salesforce customers on the Salesforce platform. And that company, we started in 2014. And because like that time we kind of knew what we were doing, and we also partnered with a smart CTO, Max Rudman, who was already building a quoting app for Salesforce. And but within 2 years, we scaled that business, I think from like, 1 to over 16 million ARR. And we were acquired by Salesforce because I got a meeting with Mark Benioff and did a demo for him. And he's just like, wow, this is so much more intuitive and many of our customers are going to want it. And so we were acquired. And then I spent about a year and a half at Salesforce integrating that. And but all of that also spawned the idea for G2.
Yes.
Which we actually started in parallel to G2. And this goes back to also why I was excited about TestBox. Yeah, but it goes back to this, while software buying and selling is way too hard.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the problems we saw, in addition to being hard to get your hands on the product, it's like the discovery was really hard. And one of the blockers we thought was Gartner, frankly. And because I just remember my first company, Big Machines, it took us 9 years to get a Gartner report, 12 years to be the leader.
Wow.
And then frankly, when these big companies like GE finally found us, they would say, wow, I wish I'd known about you 2 or 3 years ago. I've been trying to build a software in-house, but I was just looking at that Gartner report, you weren't in there.
Yep.
And then we said, wow. And the idea in some ways was obvious. We just wanted to bring consumer-like shopping to B2B software. And obviously by the time we started, G2, like 2013, obviously people were already shopping on Amazon, that had become mainstream. And obviously Amazon didn't go bankrupt.
Yeah.
It frankly went the other way, right?
The other way,
all started
absolutely.
to buy everything online.
Everything.
And also Amazon had invented the idea of online reviews. And again, in like Bezos' biography, I think he first launched them in like 1995.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And actually it was interesting, at the time he was only selling books. And actually the book publishers, his partners, got really mad at him.
Really?
Because they're like, Jeff, why are you allowing people to say nasty things about our books?
Write better books.
And that's one, like it's good feedback. But two, he also had data right away that a book, even with just one negative review, would convert higher.
Wow.
And obviously a book with 100 reviews, mostly positive, would convert, 30, 40% higher.
Incredible.
Now it's obvious, but like when I buy anything online, I'll always look at the reviews. Or at the beginning, we called G2 a Yelp for software. Because if I'm like in San Francisco and I don't live here, bar, restaurant, hey, 4.5 or higher, like I'll go there.
And I absolutely agree. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, because what I'm hearing throughout the journey is you've been ahead of the trend in almost every single aspect, right? To hear that the internet was a fad, right? And to now know how critical it is to everyone's DNA and our day-to-day lives is really interesting. So how have you been able to stay ahead of the curve? And, you've built 3 businesses and they've all been very successful. So how have you been able to do that?
I do think that's why I come to events like Dreamforce, especially being out here in the Valley. I think just through a lot of conversations, with peer entrepreneurs. I do think that's one great thing about the Bay Area and San Francisco. And obviously now it's all about AI, right? And obviously OpenAI is here, ChatGPT is here. But I do think, keeping an eye out on the bigger waves and trends in tech. And I think to those of us in tech, it's often obvious, but then the harder part is how do you execute successfully? Because even in that initial internet era, there were thousands of companies started, and obviously most of them failed.
Yes.
In spite of betting on the right trend. And then I think the second part of entrepreneurship is like, how do you persevere?
100%.
Because there are usually then those downturns. Like most tech goes through like hype, like a kind of a boom bust cycle. And then usually it does come to fruition, but oftentimes years later.
Yeah.
That's what happened with Internet 1.0. That's what happened with the cloud.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what happened with AI.
I want to dig into that because it is very interesting. What do you think of AI right now? Is it a hype cycle? I think we've already seen in a year the narrative shifting to agent mode. It is, as someone who's seen a couple of these cycles, what's your honest opinion of where we're at and where we're going?
Well, I think one, we're still early in it, but I do think it's very real. And I think we see it in our own company, like things like AI service agents. But I think there's already use cases AI is already working. We also all see it as, in our own lives, like ChatGPT as a writing assistant.
Absolutely.
So it's already working in some applications. It probably has been a bit overhyped. Mm-hmm. I think also one difference, but I think a year ago, everyone was saying, oh, wow, there's going to be these AI SDRs, like full automation.
Yeah.
Kind of going to full self-driving. And it's a bit like, I think, the Waymos. Now there's finally self-driving, but I think like Elon Musk has been saying that for 10 years.
Yeah, he's been calling it out for a long time, yeah.
And I think the Teslas aren't still quite self-driving.
Right.
And I think the same things happen kind of in SaaS, where a year ago, everyone said AI SDRs, overnight, full automation, SDRs are going to have a job anymore. I think everyone realized that's premature.
Sure.
And now I think like agent force, more people are saying, hey, it's more of a human assistant.
Sure. Which I agree. This time last year, before I joined TestBox, I was doing a bunch of research and talking to folks as well. And I ran 10 roundtables with 30 executives, some of the best software companies, asking about the impact of AI on the solutions engineering function. And almost everything that I heard was, this isn't going to replace the job. It's going to make the job more efficient, and it's going to augment the role. And I think to your point about the SDR, everything takes a lot longer than we think, right? Everything always takes a lot longer. And to be able to go and replace a function with precision and delivering value with very low misfire rates is really hard to do. I mean, I don't know what you think. Like, most of the experience I've been hearing about the AI SDRs is they're just inaccurate, right? And if you ask follow-up questions, you're not getting what you need. And so you still need a human in the loop. So, I think that perspective is very interesting. When do you think we'll start to see more of those efficiency gains in the AI agent space?
Yeah. And so I think it's hard to say exactly when.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier to over a decade. Yeah. I also love that Bill Gates quote, right? Like, we tend to always overestimate what will happen in a year, but underestimate what will happen in a decade.
That's a great quote.
And in 10 years, do I believe, like an AI SDR, AI support agent will be handling most of the current customer support and SDR job? I would definitely say yes.
Sure.
But how long does it take to go from assistant to full automation? I don't exactly know.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm curious on how, agents will impact your business model at G2.
Yeah, and we are excited about agents, and we have launched a Monty AI agent at G2.
Mm-hmm, I've seen that. Congratulations.
Thank you. And the first use case we have for Monty is to assist a software buyer. And because I think G2 has become a very complex store.
Yeah,
there's over 2,000 categories of software. It's like we have TestBox, I think, and demo automation, and a couple more categories. But demo automation, 3 years ago, didn't even exist.
It didn't exist, yeah.
And our industry keeps innovating, so there's over 2,000 categories now on G2, which is kind of cool for us software nerds.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
It's terrible for most software buyers.
100%.
And, let's say you're like a CMO, and, probably you want to start with just saying, hey, how do I improve my demand gen? How do I more efficiently generate leads? And in marketing software, for example, now we have 20 ABM categories. And ABM is account-based marketing.
Wow.
Right? And then there's account-based orchestration, account-based execution, account-based ads, account-based selling, etc. But that's really confusing for the buyer. And what AI Monty can do is be almost like a virtual Accenture consultant that's an expert in MarTech, and then guides you to the right categories, to the right products. And obviously the AI can also consider what's your company size, and we encourage people to sign up with LinkedIn. So then we know, okay, you're a go-to-market leader for a 50-person startup in San Francisco, and based on that, we can recommend apps that will likely fit your use case as well as your business context. And so that's what we're really excited about with Monty, is it can guide the software buyer to the right solutions.
Yeah, very exciting.
And then there's a second version of Monty we've created, which is a seller Monty. And that's really to help you, and you could put this on your TestBox profile, let's say on G2, but it can help you actually qualify and answer buyer questions. Because at some point, we might guide the buyer to demo automation as a category, but then they're like, oh, TestBox looks cool, they have really good reviews, but now they have some specific questions for you. They're like, hey, how long does it take to implement? What's it going to cost? And traditionally, that's when you'd hand off to a lead form. But now we can train Monty to actually answer some of your seller FAQs, help the buyer, walk the buyer further down the funnel, and then we can hand the buyer off either as an SDR, or maybe we feed them into a demo automation flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's the cool thing with a seller Monty. We can really help the buyer get further down the funnel and help the seller start to drive conversion.
Sure. I love that, right? Because I know when I'm looking for, companies in different categories and using Google search, it's all SEO and you can't actually really sort through it. It's not very good. So even for us, when we think about, lookalike companies from a go-to-market perspective, I go to G2 and I go to the grid and I look to see who's on the grid. I think what's also really interesting, and I went through this exercise at TestBox, is I pulled up everyone in the demo automation space. I pulled up all their websites and looked at all their messaging, and everyone sounds exactly the same, right? And in the demo automation space, which I appreciate that G2 has made this update in the last couple of months, is there's a lot of segmentation now in this category, right? This category was new, up and coming, but now there's really there's product tours, there's live demos, and POC automation, and those last two are where TestBox fits. When you go to companies' websites, you really can't figure out the difference, right? Because everyone's got their kind of jargon out there. So the idea that I could ask an AI to sit on the profile to give me better clarity sounds really good for buyers. And actually, I want to talk to folks who are more qualified at the end of the day anyway. So, and we're happy to, we get a lot of folks, or we've traditionally got a lot of folks who are looking for product tour softwares. And we're like, hey, we're not actually a fit for this, but we'll recommend companies that are. So to get a better level of qualification sounds great to me, honestly.
Yeah. And that's exactly what Monty can do, because we can ask, oh, you think you're just in demo automation, but is it really POC automation?
Right.
And you're right. And ultimately, I want G2 to be more like a dating site.
Yeah, I like that.
And maybe our new slogan is like fall in love on the first demo.
Oh, let's go. I like that. That's good.
Because, and ultimately, like you said, the seller, right? You're happier if you get more qualified inbound. You don't want more volume.
No.
You want perfect fit. They're looking for your functionality.
Yes.
They're the right company size, the right industry.
Yep.
And obviously, it's also what the buyer wants.
Agreed.
Right. So I think if we can be a more efficient matchmaker between software buyer and seller, and I think AI makes that a lot easier, that we can do better on both sides for the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, I really like that. And I will even just give you a quick anecdote on TestBox. When I first joined, we had a lot of inbound and a lot of demo requests because there was a sophisticated SEO strategy. But when I started combing through all the data and seeing the progression, I found things were not really progressing very well because they weren't qualified. And my philosophy is I'd rather have, if there was 100, leads, I'd rather have 10 that were qualified than 100 that are unqualified, right? And so like getting the right people to my site and in our process is really important for us. One thing that you had just mentioned that I'm really curious about is all the categories on G2. I don't want to be too controversial, but I feel like there's a lot of tech bloat out there, right? You said there's so many categories and it's confusing for buyers, right? If we put the emphasis on the buyer, it's just like, we're taught to sell value, but it comes down to feature function, right? And sometimes in these categories, do you see a shift in, consolidation or platform plays in tech over the next couple of years?
I think we have seen that over the last 2 years. And probably through 2021, it was all about more apps and more categories. It's exciting to have in our industry. And probably the past decade was that way, because cloud was still new. And I remember even like 10 years ago, even marketing automation was still a new category. You know what I mean? Because first it was just like Salesforce automation. Even Salesforce was just Salesforce automation.
Yeah.
Then it became CRM, right? And then people were like, oh, wow, we need different software for marketing. But then you also had email marketing and then you get ABM, right? But it got maybe then too granular all of a sudden.
Sure.
Even like in sales tech, now we have demo automation. But even within that, there's like POC, right? So it's gotten very stratified. And then I think the last couple of years, buyers, and also with a tougher economy, also in tech, right? People all of a sudden started saying, well, I have too many apps. I know at G2, we all of a sudden had over 200 apps. Because marketing has 50 apps, HR has 25 apps. Every team has all their apps. But I do think the trend the last couple of years has been towards consolidation.
Yeah.
And hey, let's have fewer apps. And I know our CRO at G2, Eric Gilpin, he's also it's also hard for the AE because if they have to go through 10 tools, it's also just inefficient. So I think there has been a trend towards, hey, fewer tools. And then also probably the other trend is they just have to be better integrated. So if you are going to multiple tools, it doesn't feel like it to the user.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, is that I tend to think that in software over the last decade, we've built organizational structures around our own internal needs instead of the customer.
True.
And, we've really lost sight of who matters in software buying, and it's the customer and delivering value. And I think a lot of teams see the signature, they sign off, they say, my job's done here. But really, the work's just getting started. And even when you talk about it from your own perspective, if I think about my own sales team and, sales organizations I've been a part in the past, we have all these platforms and all these tools for them to make them better at their job, but it ends up being a clunky experience. It ends up being too much for them to be able to handle. So the idea of a consolidated platform or, a couple of tools that makes their job easier feels like it's the trend that we're about to go down, especially if you add in the layer of, the market's getting tighter, getting funding's tougher than ever. And if you're not meeting growth metrics as a Series B or C or D company, what's that next step for you?
True. And I do think the other trend that's going to drive it is AI. And that was also, I think, the vision Salesforce presented this week is agents, and AI agents. And I think that's probably going to be more the software interface.
Sure.
As a sales rep, there's an agent assistant. And frankly, behind the scenes, that agent may be calling many apps and pulling into many data sources. But really, hopefully the salesperson, maybe even just speaking, maybe we even stop typing one day.
Yeah, it'd be crazy.
You're just having a conversation. Obviously, there's some tools like Gong or Chorus with conversational intelligence. They kind of do this for you, right? You used to have to manually write up notes and figure out your next steps. And now the AI obviously analyzes your call, can recommend next steps. And so I think we're getting closer, to where maybe there's one conversational AI interface for like sales. It's like their sales assistant agent.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, another way to make it easier for the salesperson, just do your job.
Yeah.
And your AI assistant, is the one feeding the apps.
Yeah.
And that's actually something we just rolled out at G2. Like we're rolling out a Medic system, our new CRO.
Cool. Okay.
But now rather than our reps manually having to go fill in all the Medic fields, we're leveraging conversational intelligence. We fill it out for them.
That's great.
And then they can just correct it.
I feel like if I'm a seller, right, do whatever you can to make my job easier. And if I'm not spending time doing admin work, I'm talking to customers, I'm helping progress deals, and I'm delivering value. Like that's what I want to be doing. And I think what's really interesting that you just highlighted that as a trend in the timeline, I'm trying to keep my pulse on, is the agent-to-agent interaction, right? I think that's where we'll start to see those efficiency gains and things really take off, is when agents are speaking to each other and I can just ask one interface that's triaged a number of systems in the past, behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, I think that's coming. I think one, you'll have your AI sales assistant that like takes your call notes, identifies the next steps, probably drafts a follow-up email. You just correct it, logs it into your CRM for you, updates your forecast, based on the quality of that call. So you really just, I think what most salespeople love doing is talking to the customer, having empathy, and you just do that, and your AI assistant is kind of feeding the beast, right? All the systems, a process to forecast updates. And I do think agent to agent, and there's another company I'm involved with, Logic, they can then generate a quote for you. And they're actually demoing this where it listens to your conversation. And frankly, also based on the conversation you just had with the customer, also generates a recommended quote for you. And I've been seeing that for a long time. I used to be a pain also. You had to go fill in like 20 attributes, go through workflow to then generate a quote for the customer. But now the AI can also listen, tap into the Logic quoting engine, and just have a recommended quote for you ready to go at the end of the call. Obviously up to you whether you want to send it, correct it. And that's just an example of, now your sales recording agent, your conversational intelligence agent, updates your CRM, but then it also talks to your quoting agent and prepares a budgetary proposal for the customer. And I do think that's going to happen quickly. And obviously, I think a salesperson's life will be much better because all the manual administrative stuff, feeding systems, generating complex quotes will all be done for you. And you can just focus on the customer, understanding their requirements and building the relationship and closing the deal.
That is a future that I definitely want to be a part of, right?
And I think it's going to happen. I mean, it's exciting.
I want to dig into you and your experience and being able to see the trends, right? I think one thing that I've heard around the success of these agents working is clean data. So do you have any point of view on how that can get transformed and that can be better? Because then, if I've got trust in the data that's being utilized, I have better trust in the output that's given to me, and I'm more likely to adopt and utilize a new agent.
And I do think there's a whole data layer that you have to get right. And I think Salesforce is calling it their data cloud, where you do have to have accurate data. And I think that is still a challenge. But there are many vendors working on solving that problem, right? Like obviously like ZoomInfo and Apollo to make sure you have the right contact data, the right title, the right email. Obviously G2, we also provide intent data. So ideally you also have a signal, what's the right time to reach out to the customer. I do think that's probably still a challenge though. And I think why some people don't trust AI. And I think why it's still a human assistant, because frankly, sometimes, and you see this, if you're using, Clearbit, a lot of times you're like, oh, wow, that's the wrong title.
Totally.
Or they switch companies, like when you cross-check with LinkedIn. So I do think the data layer, is still improving.
Right.
And that's why I think we can't go 100% self-driving yet in sales. I think you still need a human to check it.
Yeah, I could agree to that. One thing that I want to dig in there as well is you mentioned intent, right? And G2 having intent software as well. Right now, in my opinion, there's just so much noise out there. It is just so noisy out there. And trying to decipher the signals feels like a full-time job in itself. So do you see evolution in that category happening over the next couple of years?
Yes. And I think clearly you need cleaner, better data. I think most companies also need a multi-intent strategy. Like one, you look at your own digital properties, which is kind of like your first-party data. You can see how your prospects engaging your own website, your own webinars, et cetera. And then you look at second-party data, like that's what we call G2, which is, obviously we can tell you what's happening on our marketplace. Like, are you looking at test box? Are you looking at your competitors? We can give you that signal in real time. And there's also third-party data, which would be providers like Bombora, ZoomInfo, Sixth Sense, which is more like, hey, in general, what topics is this prospect engaging with online? And I think the key is in a data cloud, you bring it all together and you find the signal. But I do think we have to make it easier as vendors. And as I was talking to Sam about this, provide better algorithms, better scoring, so you can ultimately trust a signal.
Yeah, absolutely.
In sales, we just want the clean signal. Hey, this prospect is definitely hot.
Yes.
And you can trust it.
Yes.
And so I think it's still a bit like contact and account data. It's not perfect enough where you can go full automation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't just
right.
get an intense signal and send automated emails, because sometimes, it's not accurate.
Right. I wonder what unintended consequences it will have if it gets so accurate, right? Like, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I do think consumer always leads the way.
Yeah.
And maybe then I would say it's like Insta marketing.
Yeah.
Which is creepily perfect.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, because somehow, like, I have a 17-year-old daughter. She loves to ski. And now I'm, like, getting pre-season, like, ski jacket clearance. And, like, happens to be her favorite brand, her favorite color. And it's always kind of creepy. Like, it's, like, weird. I was just talking to my wife about ski season.
And then, boom, pops up.
And so I think consumer has gotten there. And obviously some people think it's creepy. I also think it's super useful. And I think B2B is just a bit behind.
Yeah, there was a quote Sean Whiteley told me a couple of years ago at a pre-sales collective event. And he said, Amazon and Uber have ruined speed and personalization for B2B software companies,
True.
Right?
It's
because
so good.
Yeah, it's true, because now our expectations are changing, right? He was like, hey, if you call an Uber and it said 45 minutes, you would likely cancel. Right. You know what I mean? So it is very, very interesting. And I'm with you that I think those consumer trends are just bleeding into B2B. And I've had this debate for years. People are like, well, B2B buying software is different in the enterprise. But my philosophy is the same person that you're selling to is also using Amazon. They're using Chewy. They're using Uber and Lyft. So those behaviors individually then start to creep into an enterprise.
Exactly. That was all a founding idea for G2. Yeah, because we're also like, wow, Gartner reports. That's a bit like Encyclopedia Britannica. You may not even remember it, but like when I was going to school in the 80s, like there was no internet, right? So I went to the library, looked at Britannica. It was a well-curated book, but it was always 2 years old. That's a bit like the Quadrant, right? It's like a well-curated book, but 2 years old. So I do think you can reliably, eventually consumer comes to B2B, but a lot of these things are harder in B2B. And frankly, we also don't have the resources, right? Like of an Uber and the amount of data.
Sure.
We have patchier, smaller data sets. And so I think it takes longer in B2B, to make these trends really work.
Yeah, that's a great call out. One question I'd like to finish with, right, is continuing to see around the corners, right? Again, I've brought this up a couple of times, but looking through your career, you've been part of ups and downs. You've been able to see around the corners. We've talked about some things that are like really top of mind for us in software today. Is there anything that you're thinking will fundamentally change over the 5 to 10 years that we haven't talked about today?
Well, I think we have talked about it, but I do think like what I was just talking about also with G2 is like, hey, what is really the system of engagement? And both kind of a fear and opportunity I see, like, does it just end up with one AI agent? Maybe it's also, is it ChatGPT, right? And then is almost all of their software behind the scenes? And then as specialist vendors, how do we differentiate there? Are we just kind of like an AI service or a second-hand agent that the primary agent calls? Do we have unique proprietary data? A lot what I'm thinking about the companies I'm involved with is like, hey, how do we, in this age of AI, as the software interface probably shifts to one conversational agent, how do we stay relevant and valuable?
Yeah.
As the way software is consumed likely goes to, conversational agents.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and I'm very curious to see if it'll be incumbents that are leading the way, if it'll be companies we haven't heard of, there'll be companies that exist today. Very, very keen to see what these next couple of years look like.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's exciting time to be in tech and be in San Francisco, because honestly, like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
But it'll be exciting to help shape that future over the next few years.
Absolutely. You're definitely doing that. And I really appreciate your time. It was great talking to you. Great to hear about your journey. Love what you're doing with G2 and really that social proof. I use it all the time. So big fan. Thanks for sharing your perspective, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.